hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, science advisor Matt Moniz, and Stephanie Burke. Maybe if I introduce you first, it won't be as weird. If I'm like,
I think you're right.
let me try that again. Hold on.
Okay.
Let's pretend like those last
Do
30
over.
seconds never happened. Welcome back to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with Stephanie Burke, science advisor Matt Moniz, and the silent assassin Matt Costa. That seems to have a nice
I
flow
like
to it.
that because you don't have a weird nickname either.
I don't. People called me the ghost host at the beginning. That was what they had dubbed me on the chat room. But now Sophia temporarily uses that. So, and I don't want people to think I copied her, even though we've been doing the show since she was like 5 years old.
Right. Well, maybe if we go in that order from now on, I won't seem like.
I'll try and go left to right. I'll go counterclockwise, which goes against everything, every fiber of my being.
I'm very sorry.
But I'll try and do that, just so that you won't feel awkward. But I feel awkward saying it too.
I think it bothers your OCD a little bit too, though.
It does. I'll just keep going left to right from now on. We'll get past this.
Why don't you swap seats with Costa?
Because we need to stick him over in the corner for the computer stuff.
No, have Stephanie and Matt switch.
Yeah, I need him over there though. Plus, I feel so much less rude when I do this to him.
Yeah, right? You have a point.
You know, if it was Stephanie, I'd be like, hey, thanks for joining us on the show every week now. I don't want to look at you.
That's very true.
But I've been looking at him for over 8 years now, so I've had enough.
Oh, poor Matt.
It's only because I can't get the camera can't get the computer monitor to the middle.
We need another widescreen shot coming from the other side so we can see Matt Costa.
No more cameras.
I know. We're already maxing out what we can do.
We do have a lot.
To begin with. By the time we're done with what we have envisioned here, we're going to have a full-scale production going on. We're going to have to hire an outside production company to come in. And if anybody wants to do that, we'd love to have it. We think that this would make a fantastic television program, but nobody seems to agree with that. So
now it's 10 times better.
It is. It's in the response that I've gotten over the week. Some people called you the girl.
Yes.
But that's going to happen.
Girl for a while.
You'll be the girl for a while. But there's been nothing but positive response. I haven't heard any negative comments about adding you to the program. So
well, that's a good thing. It might happen, but
no, I think that also means that we've set the bar so low too.
Oh, no.
That you can't help but come in and be an improvement.
Well, I shook things up a little bit. It's been a guy show for a long time.
It has been. The testosterone in here was palpable, and quite frankly, I was choking on it, and it smelled bad.
Well, that's not good.
So now that you're here, and you've kind of upped the game for us a little bit too, because now like we wear deodorant before we come in, because we don't want to offend your feminine sensibilities.
I appreciate that.
So before, and you can already tell because we're an hour into the program and Moni still has his shoes on.
Oh, that's good.
So that's how you know that.
I didn't know
that
was like a weird unwritten rule.
It's kind of a problem.
Do we normally take our shoes off?
Last summer we almost smashed the glass window.
Oh no! All right, we can't have any of that because I have super smell right now.
I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. I never even noticed till
I'm used to the subway smell.
We do get a lot of that in here, and you'll get more of the other smell from the other side too.
There's more smell.
Oh yeah, wait till you head out in the parking lot.
No, the parking lot is really bad at night.
Yeah, and it gets worse in the summertime.
I'm sure.
When it's 90 degrees out.
Awesome.
All right, so yeah, sooner or later we're gonna have to figure out where that's coming from and see if we can get them to get it fixed. I think it's because we're the only people that are ever here at the time when it bothers us.
So nobody else knows.
Yeah, nobody else knows. So it's kind of up to us, but that's all right. We can exchange. Just leave your Wi-Fi password unprotected, and it'll be a fair deal. Although we have Wi-Fi now here in the studio, so we've come so far. See, if you had been here in the early days, when we were recording everything on a little podcast recorder because there was no computer over here, and they didn't have all this technology, and we didn't even have internet in the studio.
Those are the days where I didn't know any of you, and I used to listen as a viewer.
You were weird.
I did, and I used to get so excited to listen to you guys too. How weird is that?
You didn't have anything to do on a Saturday night better than listen to us?
No, but at that point I was probably totally underage in high school, so.
Not that we advocate that kind of thing, but you could have found something better to do than listen to us.
I too young to work, and definitely too young to go out. So I like paranormal stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
And did you ever think that someday you'd be here on the program?
I never thought that would happen.
Because she thought we were going to be canceled well before that.
No.
So did we.
Yeah, exactly. We don't even know how we're still here. The only reason we're still here is because they haven't changed the locks and the key still works.
That's a good thing.
All right. Well, let's get back into the discussion with our guest tonight, Peter Tower. He's the author of the book Hockomock, The Place Where Spirits Dwell, and you can check it out. You can get it from Schiffer.com. We also have it linked up right to the front page of SpookySouthcoast.com as well, if you would like to get the book there. And Peter, are you doing any book signings or any events around here locally?
Not yet. I've been doing radio shows mostly, I guess, lately. I talked on the UFO and Paranormal Radio Network last month. So yeah, I'm trying to get out more. It's interesting the reaction that the book gets. Some people aren't particularly interested in talking about it, I guess. But
well, I think part of it though is people don't realize what a huge part of it. I mean, everybody recognizes the Bridgewater Triangle now. It's taken over the paranormal world. When you talk about Massachusetts, everybody wants to talk about the Bridgewater Triangle. But I think it's lost on a lot of people that the Hockomock is the heart of that.
Yeah, and I guess the book is about the Bridgewater Triangle, but I didn't, like I said before, I think I wanted to take it back a little bit deeper, and part of that was expanding it geographically into when I say Hockomock, I'm just not talking about the swamp. I kind of redefined the region, like as the Taunton River watershed.
Mm-hmm.
As I started looking at what was going on back through history, it seemed to me that I think it's maybe 28, 32 towns around in the watershed, and it seemed to spread out there. So I started thinking of it more as a Hockomock region, and that's why I called it Hockomock, and I kind of see that as bigger than the actual swamp or the Bridgewater Triangle. It seems to spread out further to me. I didn't really. I agree with what Lauren Coleman did in framing it in the triangle in terms of the flap in the 70s, but to me it seemed to spread out even further.
And to take a step back, I mean, for those unfamiliar, we call, well, and you titled the book, Hockomock, Place Where the Spirits Dwell, and we think that that's probably the best translation of what Hockomock means.
Well, I thought that too, and I guess it's when I first started doing my research, I kind of accepted that, and then I went down. I talked to the guys down at the Massachusetts Archaeological Society in Middleborough, and they kind of gave me their take on the whole place, and I had a chance to talk to Jean-Jacques Rivard. I don't know if you know him. He was a very old man who unfortunately just passed away, I believe. Maybe I want to say 3 years ago. In his 90s, he was volunteering down there. And Jean-Jacques was a very interesting guy. He did his best work, I think, in the 1960s with the Maya. He went down and translated the Maya language and did a lot of archaeological work down there. And he ended up later in life coming up here, and he composed a Wampanoag dictionary, which is still sitting down. It's unpublished. It's down at the Archaeological Society. So I talked to Jean-Jacques. He's this old kind of French guy, and he's cool because he also does all this. He does Wampanoag painting, like he paints myths. So he's got all these cool paintings down there. When the Crow first brought corn to the Wampanoags and stuff, and then he does this. He's a linguist, really. So I started talking to him, and I asked him, I said, what, I forget if I asked him what it meant or he told me, but he broke the word down, and he said it means hawk. He pronounced it hogue, which means body in the Massachusetts dialect of Algonquin. And Hockomock means enclosure or platform. So he told me that Hockomock basically means body enclosure.
Okay. And that's a far more benign definition than what we previously thought.
Well, I see it as more malignant in a way, Tim, because I think we know it's a burial ground. So what he was telling me was that it's a giant body enclosure or a place where bodies were put on platforms.
Oh, okay, I see.
Right? So once I heard that, so that's the literal translation of the word. So when you start getting into linguistics, you get when you start breaking words down literally, Massachusetts or any town name or anything, you get different meanings. So that's the literal translation. Then I started thinking, okay, so, and then, Dr. Hoffman and these guys were telling me that, they definitely dug up a lot of Native American remains down there. And they were doing the highways and stuff. So that kind of changed my whole perception of the place.
And when you're chronicling all of this information that he's giving you, and first of all, the fact that he created a Wampanoag dictionary that is just sitting there. I mean, we need that because we have so many of these words as part of our everyday lives that we have no idea what they mean. I know people who live on streets called Sassamon or Tispaquen, and they don't understand that these were people. They just, oh, gee, I wonder what that word means. No, that's a person. It's a very relevant person in our history, and they just don't know.
It's a person, but the interesting thing, like, I'm not a very good linguist, but like I try to understand it, and like I said, like when you break down the word literally, there's a meaning to the word Tispaquen, right? And like I got into a little bit of that in Hockomock, where a lot of these guys in the past, there's a lot of people who, you're talking about Dighton Rock, and they're saying Miguel Court Real possibly lived on Sonnet Neck for 14 years. Maybe he was the first true settler of America, and Quinn was a word, part of a word in Portuguese, which meant royalty. And when you start seeing names like Tispaquen, you start looking at the Wampanoags, like Tispaquen, who was Wampanoag royalty. You start seeing a lot of the Quins, and a lot of these people start saying, well, okay, if you break the word down literally, they took this from Miguel Court Real, who was Portuguese. He was a royal Portuguese navigator. His father discovered Newfoundland, and him and his brother Gaspar coasted south. We don't know how far they came, but they're the ones who are supposed to have written on Dighton Rock. We're pretty sure they did in 1501. So when you break the words down literally, you start seeing things like that. You start saying, okay, why was this guy named Tispaquen? So you can kind of learn more, Tim, from the names when you break them down like that. It's just kind of hard to understand.
Right, you get more of the history of why, and some of the hidden history actually.
Yeah.
In that. So when we're discussing then the native impact on the area, I mean, just paint the picture for people of what happens because for a lot of folks outside of this area, or people that don't listen to this show where we talk about it quite a bit, they look at the late 19th, early 20th century version of Thanksgiving. That they look at that as being the story of how the Pilgrims came here, and the Indians befriended them, and then everybody got along, and they all had a big Thanksgiving celebration together, and they don't realize the nuances of that relationship, and really how just how much was at stake in those early days, and how much conflict there was between the two sides.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so I'm a Christian, right? And as I said, I'm also a Mayflower descent, but I'm a Christian. So this is very much a Christian book, Tim, which is, I just approached it that way because when I started getting into the spiritual aspects of it, that was my frame of reference.
Yeah, and you're upfront about that with the book too.
I try to identify with the Christian views of the Pilgrims versus the pagan views of the Wampanoags. And I wrote a chapter called Cosmic War, which kind of redefines King Philip's War. I've read some pretty good, notable books in the last few years that portray it a certain way, and a lot of times it's kind of down on the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were the guys killing everybody. They took the Indians' land because they wanted more land. But I kind of did a lot of research, and I started to see that it was really, I call it Cosmic War because I really feel like it was a spiritual struggle between a typical struggle, just like back in ancient Rome, between Christians and pagans. And that was very much the forces that were driving these guys, right? So you get Bradford's and the Boston, Massachusetts Bay colonies, the Cotton Mathers of the world advising the governors, and then you get Massasoit, and you get his shamans and his Paneses, who were his inner circle, who were the chosen people of Hockomock, who was their evil god of death and disease, right? And they're advising Massasoit, and the Christians like Cotton Mather and these guys, or before him, were advising Winslow, were advising the Pilgrims, and it was all about it was a different frame of reference then. It was all about religion. It was all about what your God is going to do to help you win the battle, and that's all there really was. So it was kind of different, you know. I had to try to put myself in that world, and when I wrote it through King Philip's War, it came out very different from what you typically see as an account today. And the reason that was important for me is because I wanted to understand who the Wampanoags were talking to, who the shamans were talking to, who Hockomock was, and how they summoned him, and what they believed he was, and how they contacted him, and try to bring that forward and see if there was any links between them then and what's going on today down there.
Mm-hmm. And that atmosphere that was around both groups, and especially extending into King Philip's War, and I personally feel like that has left a mark and a lasting legacy on this area. You know, we talk about how this area has higher crime rates than the rest of the state. They have higher instances of mental abuse, of suicide, of mental illness, of suicide, of all these different factors that I think a lot of that has to do with living here and living in this area that has just a negative energy that's trapped around it. And it probably goes back to that.
Yeah, and I think you and Chris are right on that, and I know you guys have done a lot of research on that, and unfortunately, I think it's a little bit darker in my book. I think there definitely, maybe there is some negative energy left from that, Tim, but I really believe that the energy, that this deity, Hockomock, was composed of the spirits of the evil dead,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that the Wampanoags worshipped. The shamans contacted this deity, and they basically kept the people living in fear by the time that the Pilgrims arrived. We're talking about some very bad spirits here, and not all Indian tribes do that. The Wampanoags may not do that now. I don't know. The Sioux, for example, worship the Creator. So I got into I did a lot of research on what Indians, what they worship, and a lot of the tribes worship the Creator. But then there's the flip side. When we came here, the Wampanoags were worshiping the other side, the side of death, disease, and the spirits of the dead, right? So what you get there is, from you guys have probably talked to people, other type of people who've had paranormal experiences. When you deal with the spirits, you never know what you're dealing with, right? And
Yeah.
the problem, Christianity says, which I believe the Bible says, don't deal with spirits, and don't play with Ouija boards, like your parents told you. And it actually, I think it turned out to be pretty good advice, because spirits like to trick people, right?
Right. I mean, we find that all the time.
Yeah. So when you're dealing, okay, you can contact the spirit, but chances are it's going to be a bad spirit. And so the whole thing with the Hockomock, Tim, comes down to the fact that there was this for thousands of years, okay, there was these people who were worshiping these spirits. We know from the Wampanoags' own accounts that most of these spirits were bad spirits. There's no doubt. They told Edward Winslow that, who was the Pilgrims' main spiritual advisor at the time. They told him that they basically equated Hockomock with the devil.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't very good analogy, because they didn't really have a concept of one master of the underworld like we do. It was composed of many spirits, but it was still it was valid because it was an evil. They saw it as an evil deity. So you get that going on for thousands of years. We know that the dead were buried in the swamp. We know. I think the shamans typically went into swamps to hold their ceremonies, right? So it all kind of comes together, and I think even before the war, Tim, I think that there was some bad stuff going on down there, and that's where the negative energy comes from. That was added to by the events that happened in the war.
Okay, so it's more of the long-lasting impact of this conjuring, more so than it was about the conflict.
Yeah, so the whole thing with the Hockomock, right? The big question is why. I wrote about cults in my book, Satanists. I needed to understand what these people were doing, which is, the whole question down there is why are these spirits so available, right? Why, and that to me is what makes the Hockomock a unique place, is that the spirits, and many of them I believe are bad spirits, they're available there. They're easily contacted there.
Never really thought, and that could be why we have so many reports coming out today from people who are not looking for it.
Not what?
Not looking for it. People who just move into a house that seems to have activity, or people who go into the woods, say searching for Bigfoot, and end up coming out with an incredible ghost story. That maybe these spirits are.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the biggest things I always tell people, for me, is what made it real for me is when I started researching this place, I hiked through the swamp at night by myself for a while. I just went in there at night because I wanted to see what was in there. And the thing for me that made it real is, like, I grew up in the woods near there, and I've hiked all around up in Vermont, everywhere else, a lot of places, through all kinds of wilderness mountain areas. And the thing that made it real for me is I can always feel that presence looking at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's you're never alone, and it's almost like around every corner there's something waiting.
Yeah, it's like you can feel the eyes on you. Some people call it. Every time I go in there, and I'm not any kind of psychic or anything, but I can feel something looking at me, and it's not friendly. And that was, for me, when I started going in there, that was the weirdest feeling, because I've been in I don't feel that in other places in the woods, but I feel it there, And I found out later, like as I read these events happening across the world, that feeling happens other places too. Other places where these kind of things happen, people have that presence. They feel that presence. Those eyes on them.
Mm-hmm.
Not unique.
So, well, you had mentioned before that you are a Christian. Then, coming from a Christian background, how does how does what your experiences are in the Hockomock fit into your faith?
I mean, they're evil spirits. It's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you go in an area and there's a malevolent spiritual presence, I think you can feel it.
Do you feel that it's connected to what would be the Christian belief of the devil?
This is the question, right? So it's like, why? So eventually I started asking myself, what's in there? That's what you have to ask yourself, what's in there. So that's when you start studying the phenomenon, the mystery cats, black dogs, the UFOs, Bigfoot, the cattle mutilations, all this stuff, right? And how it comes together. And I started asking myself, what is it? So I started researching those phenomenon and the Thunderbirds, and I think I drew out a conclusion in a story type form in the book. I think it's a mix of things. Like you said earlier, I think you referred to a perfect storm. there's a couple different things going on down there, and one of them is definitely the presence of evil spirits, and I think there's other things in there too that I kind of go into in the book. But
Well, I mean, basically, we look at, at least in the paranormal world, we call the Hockomock Swamp, the Bridgewater Triangle, we call it a vortex area, an area where there's a high concentration of paranormal activity. And I'm just wondering if maybe what you may be suggesting is that it's more akin to, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but more akin to almost like a gateway to hell. This is kind of like where we descend into that.
So there's
on
a
Earth.
couple of things. So I started studying, of all things, this guy, Manuel Swedenborg, wrote a book called Heaven and Hell. He was a mystic around just at the end of the 18th century. He lived in Europe. There's actually a Swedenborgian church down in Bridgewater. There used to be one at Harvard University. He was a mystic. He was also he was said to be the brightest guy in the history of the world besides the Goethe. Very well respected guy. He ran a lot of stuff in Sweden, and anyway, he was a mystic, and he wrote a lot of stuff, and I read his stuff, and he basically said that there's he claimed to be able to. I read him because my minister told me about him, and I read him because he's the only guy who was respected, who said he could travel between heaven and hell. So he went through this period for about 10 years, and he said that he could go and travel, and he wrote about it. And so what he says is that it's a series of reflections, and you can read this. I was just reading Plato's Republic last week, and he has a similar concept of being in a cave and having a fire behind you, and you're seeing shadows in front of you, but you're really just looking at the shadows. And if you ever turn around, you're going to see the real beings.
Mm-hmm.
Plato kind of says that it's shadows, and Swedenborg says that it's reflections. So he says there's heaven, and it reflects onto earth. And what you're saying is it reflects into hell, but there's also a place in between, I think.
Okay.
Under our feet, in the earth, it's a spirit world. And it's a direct reflection of what's in the Hockomock or somewhere else. It seems a lot of cultures think it's some kind of holding ground between the earth and hell, or the earth and heaven.
Well, I mean, it with the reports that come out of there and the level of activity, that definitely seems to be along the lines of what people have reported coming out of there. But
Yeah.
now, when you look at it in that regard, then you have to kind of take a step back then and say, well, if that's the case, if it is this thin membrane between that spirit world and this world, what can be the negative repercussions then of us constantly trying to walk that line of us, as paranormal investigators say on our end of things, if we're going in there all the time and we're trying to seek out this type of phenomena, what's going to happen to us if we keep trying to travel back and forth between our world and that spirit world?
Well, I mean, like I said, I can only approach it. I was in there, and some things happened to me when I was in there, and I don't get scared much, but I got afraid in there sometimes at night. And the thing that carried me through was my Christian faith. And I don't think so. So there's this thing, right? When the Indians were, the shamans were cursing Plymouth, and there were all kinds of stuff was going on. These guys they were drawing powers from the spirit world. They could freeze water in their hands in the summertime. They could split rocks. They could do all the same kind of stuff that people can do today. But when a Christian, especially a Christian minister, came to them, they had no power. They had nothing, right? So they had no power to do anything. So, it's this kind of thing where I believe that Christianity, God's kind of the king God. He's my God, but I believe He has control over all this stuff. So for me, it was to be a Christian. I believe that protects me because the Bible says, these evil spirits have no power against. really have no power against Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that was my protection, and I would not have gone in there if I didn't have that after a certain point.
Well, that and a flashlight, I would think too, because it gets pretty
I
pretty
don't
nasty
use
in
lights
there.
in there. I don't use lights in the woods.
Well, one thing that I can't bring with me if I go in is my cell phone because I get terrible. You know, everybody gets terrible coverage in there, but mine, I have T-Mobile, so
Yeah.
it's especially bad. You know, I
Yeah.
just gotta rely on carrier pigeons in case you get lost.
I carry a lot of other stuff. Nothing to do with lights.
Well, there you go. And when we're talking too about the modern swamp, we have to understand too that we've encroached upon a lot of what would have encompassed their swampland too. I mean, we've been able to kind of knock it down to a fraction of what it would have been back in that time.
We knocked a little bit down.
Mm-hmm.
The railroad, like you said, is a concern. I mean, that's the big one.
Yeah.
We've been kind of nibbling away at it. You know, it's at the edges, building new developments and things like that, chipping away at it. But
and we paid a price for it too. The more that we've encroached upon it, the more the activity has amped up. Well, one thing that I do want to ask you about in the book is you mix in some, I guess we can call it kind of like some historical narrative, but it's fictional, but it's your take on what might have been going on at the time, and it's almost like it almost plays out like two separate stories, but they work together hand in hand. You know, it's almost like you're telling this story, and then you have the nonfiction guide to the background to that story.
yeah, I hope you're right. I hope it does work together.
Well, I mean, it seems to, but and when you are writing that fictional aspect of it, how did you come up with those ideas? Was it just something that you had speculated upon, or was it something that kind of just came to you as you were doing this research?
Came to me, yeah. It's like I have a kind of a weird style of writing where I write nonfiction for a while, and then I kind of just I want to do both. You know, I've read really good nonfiction books about places, and I've read really good fiction books, but none of them seem to kind of give it all, or at least I don't know how to combine them. So what I do is I'll just write nonfiction, and then a scene will come to me, and I'll see it. You know, I'll just see what happened back in Bridgewater in 1880, and I'll just write it through. So you kind of, I like to think that you get kind of the facts and figures, but then you can kind of see the movie of it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Some of this stuff, particularly towards the end, when I'm writing about John the Baptist baptizing people in the Hockomock River and all this crazy stuff, it just, I don't know where it came from. I think it kind of came from God. You know, I just started writing these scenes, and it just kind of worked, you know, and seemed to make sense. I don't know if it makes sense to anyone else, but
well, but I mean, if it's the story that you are meant to tell, then then you got to kind of let it flow out of you.
Yeah, so it kind of came out, and I'm hoping it makes sense. So I know it'll make sense to guys like you and Chris. How many other people it makes sense who know the Bridgewater Triangle? It's I'll be curious to see how many other people it actually makes sense to, because there's a lot there. You know, you kind of have to understand the phenomena, the basic what's going on with UFOs and Bigfoot and all this stuff, and to kind of make sense of it. But I'm hoping that at least the community will understand it.
Well, one thing I can tell you, at least about the paranormal community here, is that the Wampanoags have become the sympathetic figures in this story to a lot of the investigators, and it's become more that they were victimized by the colonists, and that they were converted, and a lot of the time against their will, and that King Philip's War was a result of the aggressiveness of the colonists, and so you'll find a lot of folks who are on the side of the Wampanoags and will kind of have the reverse take that you've taken on the.
Yeah, it's not a politically correct book, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
I read a good quote the other day. Someone was saying, if you're going to be a writer, write the truth. Don't write what's politically correct. Write the truth, and that's
Right.
what I do. And there's some hard things in this book. It definitely comes out on the side of the Christians and the Pilgrims. which is pretty unpopular today, to be honest with you.
Right. And
But I called it, the way I saw it, and if you look at the way the Wampanoags were living, I have a lot of respect for them. I have a lot of respect for their spirituality. But if you look at the way that they were living their religious life when we came here, there's a lot to be desired. I mean, they were worshiping an evil. Their main deity wasn't Theoden or Cotton. It was Hockomock, an evil god of death and disease. And a lot of that wasn't their fault, in my mind. A lot of that, the shamans, they were the victims of their shamans. So just like you see some priests of today who are taking advantage of their people, the shamans were very much taking advantage of the Wampanoags, holding them in fear. And they were worshiping some bad spirits.
I mean,
so,
I think
some people don't like to hear that, but that's the way I saw it. So,
but maybe the inverse of that, or maybe the other side of it would be similar to a lot of the Puritan era preachers who were all about hellfire and brimstone and using that fear as a way to control their own people.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the flip side. But on the other hand, I mean, we were worshiping the Creator. So there's this theme, right? Like the Sioux worshiped their god the main god was the Creator. And on the flip side, you get the god, the death and disease god that kind of, I think, some tribes slipped into. The Creator is typically he's the god of life and goodness, right? He can be harsh, but then you get these other dudes who, they're going to bring death. They're going to make you sick, and they're going to bring death to you if you don't give the shaman his cut, right? You don't do what he wants. Give him his political power. You're going to pay the price, and that's the deal that was going on.
Well, part of it though too is, your religion and the way that you're looking at it is through a monotheistic approach, whereas with the Wampanoags they were more polytheistic, where they had multiple gods that would be worshipped, and so for them, it might have just been whichever one they needed to satisfy at the time, whichever one was the benevolent one. Like, so if you go back to just look, for example, the idea of the Pukwudgie.
Yep.
They were these negative beings, these evil entities that came about as a result of their interaction with what I thought was the creator god, which was Mashop. And because of that interaction and because of that conflict, then the Wampanoags had to constantly appease these Pukwudgie creatures. So maybe that's kind of the same idea as to why they were worshiping Hockomock. It wasn't so much that they were revering him as much as that they were trying to satiate him and keep him at bay. I mean, a lot of religions seem to do that over history. It's less about, the good guys that they want to worship and love. And all right, I think that might have been our first ever guest hang up. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. If he wants to call back, he has the number. 508-996-0500 if anybody has any questions. But
I saw your question as relevant.
I wasn't trying to crap on his beliefs at all. I'm just saying that that's another approach to taking it.
No, but at the same time, if you're gonna write
Actually,
a
it
book,
sounds like the appropriate approach.
Well, I'm never going to tell somebody which religion is right and which one is wrong. I'm just suggesting that there's the possibility that it wasn't worship
as it was appeasement.
Appeasement, yeah. Right. And especially when you look at a lot of the pagan cultures, a lot of the pagan events, a lot of the holidays, a lot of the observances were just as much about appeasement as they were about worship.
everything had balance.
Yeah.
There was always balance. And I think if you're going to write a book with a controversial issue like that, you have to look at both sides no matter what you believe in. So just to make it all about balance, all about fair, and you're kind of stepping over the line by going into that paranormal aspect.
When, how should I put this? Again, I mean, I have no...
Carefully.
Well, I have no dog in a religious fight, so I have...
Right.
no reason to push one agenda over the other myself. And I don't know enough about other people's religions to say if they're right or wrong. And everybody has the right to worship what they believe
We respect
freely.
everybody.
Exactly. But when you look at what was going on for the natives at the time, you're dealing with all of a sudden these people come from somewhere else. And the Pilgrims weren't the first. You know, the 1620 visit from the English wasn't the first. They had been there
Right.
previously. I think he's calling back in. So
Yes.
I think so. When you, just to finish my point, when you look at what was going on, it had been a period of a number of years that they'd been having these visitations. Maybe it was the English that was the reason why they thought Hockomock was coming down on them.
Well, bear in mind that they had just spent a number of decades dealing with the diseases that were brought by the
Very true.
settlers at that time. So
And-
the god of disease and death was what they were facing. So trying to appease that.
There would have been
still-
a large fear.
Yeah,
right, still at that time.
and
I'm
what
gonna-
he
I'm
was
gonna
saying
bring
is
Peter-
the shamans, capitalizing on that, just like
Yeah.
priests
There's
of
good and
various
bad,
other
no matter
religions have
what they
capitalized on
Oh, yeah.
fear of their people. It's
Yep.
it's power is power, and
Well,
it
It is.
crosses
And it
all
existed
cultures.
back then
yes.
too, just
Yeah.
like it does now.
Bring Peter back in here.
Yeah,
Peter, are you
guys.
with us?
Guys, I mean, you got to remember, the Indians took a very practical approach
Well-
to this stuff.
But
They-
before you finish your point, I just want to make that was a disconnection, not a hang up.
I think it was a disconnection. Yeah, I didn't.
Okay.
Of course, I didn't hang up.
I was going to say we haven't lost anybody yet. So,
Yeah. I
although
think I
wait a
pushed
minute,
the
maybe,
wrong- I
maybe
think it was
Commander
my fault.
Sanicito we might have
Yeah.
lost.
Pushed
The
the wrong
reincarnated Roswell alien. I think she might have hung up on us, but that was fine. So I'm sorry, you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I read, if you read Edward Winslow, I mean, these guys, the Indians took a very practical approach to religion. They, from what I understood, like you said, they wanted to appease them. Their attitude was, okay, this is a very powerful God. I'm going to appease him. I'm going to pray to him, because if I don't, he's going to bring death and disease to me.
Yep,
And
they already did.
By the way, the Creator's always going to be nice to me because he's the Creator. I think that's the attitude that they took.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. When the settlers first started coming to the area, they started suffering all of these diseases, and I think that's what prompted them to, start trying to appease Hockomock. Is he was in the area. This is what's happening. This is what we're seeing.
Yeah,
so
they're looking at the English and what they're bringing to them and saying, "Holy crap, Hockomock, what did we do to piss you off?"
Well, guys, I told you. I mean, this isn't a politically correct view. I believe that Hockomock was being worshipped for a long time before we showed up. That's just my opinion.
Mhm.
I respect
And,
your opinion.
and you're
I mean,
entitled to yours as well.
It's not popular. I mean,
Yeah, we just try to we like to try to come up with all the different theories too. I mean, you can have yours, but we just try to cover all the bases because we think that in terms of the discussion, what we try to be is we try to be the I call us the avatar for the audience. So we're just trying to
Yeah.
bring up some of the questions that they might have as well.
oh, I totally understand.
And one of the interesting things about it, though, is that you're dealing with a people that we had no basis to go on. The English, the Europeans, they had no real basis because of the way that their culture had advanced in Europe. They didn't have this native aspect to deal with. Had they encountered other native people before, then they might have had a little bit more of a emphasis. I'm sorry, a little bit more of a basis of comparison. But to them, they saw the natives as being no different than some of the other wild animals they were encountering.
Well, you got to remember. I mean, these guys were believed that Bradford and these guys and Winslow and John Alden, they believed that the devil lived in the wilderness. Because after the fall of man, the Bible says that God released the devil into the wilderness, right? So they were fully under the belief that the people that lived in the wilderness were under the influence of the devil. So they fully expected to find people under the influence of the devil. And one of the ironies in the book that I talk about is that when they came here, if they had moved out west and met the Sioux, they wouldn't have found that. You know, they would have found a race of people who worshiped the Creator,
Mhm.
and that was basically through the chiefs, right? But when they came here to New England, they found the shamans were more in control than Massasoit was, and they were worshiping the other side of the equation. So they actually found, in my mind, Tim, I think they actually found their worst nightmare. They found what they believed in.
Yeah, I mean that could definitely be the case, and I think too part of what Moniz was saying was right too, that they could have just been being controlled by that small group within their own people. You know, it could have been a power play on their part. Because I mean, we look back at some of the history that we do know about, and when we're talking about Massasoit in the early days of the English coming here, you know, the Sagamores, the sachems, were the people who were kind of in his ear constantly with all the advice, and he wouldn't do anything without consulting them. And
Yeah.
it seems when you look at it, everybody likes to give Massasoit credit for trying to bridge that gap in the beginning, but he only went as far as it seemed that they would allow him to go.
Yeah, I mean, they were his advisors, you know, and the Phoenicians were the real powerful guys. You know, the Wampanoags who went out, did their ordeal in the wilderness as young adults, were contacted by Hockomock and were given special powers in battle and all that. And Tispiquin was the ultimate form of that. And you know, what I learned is that a lot of the atrocities that were committed against the settlers, and there was atrocities on both sides, and the Indians did it too, were committed by Tispiquin. And Tispiquin, he prayed directly to Hockomock. Okay, and you know, when he went into Bridgewater, before he went into Bridgewater, and he was going to destroy the town. You guys may have heard this story. And he prayed. Him and the other shamans prayed to Hockomock before they went in, and they saw a vision of a bear in the sky, and he called off the attack. And there was only 30 guys that could have defended Bridgewater at that point. And he backed off, and he later said, you know, if I had seen a deer, I would have attacked and killed everybody. But they were taking direct counsel from Hockomock. And Hockomock was not a benign force.
Oh no, it definitely does not sound that way. Well, we're coming up on the final few minutes of the program here, but as you said, you know, this is a topic that's going to be very controversial to a lot of not only the paranormal researchers here, but a lot of the historians in the area as well. And
Yep.
And you'd mentioned that, you know, you were having some trouble getting the word out about this on some of these shows, and I wonder if that might be the part of the reason, because what I've realized is that not to toot our own horn here, but not everybody that's in paranormal radio wants to tell a story from every side and wants to have every side have its say.
Oh yeah.
So there's probably a stigma against you already if you're, you know, for the views that you take with this book, and hopefully people who are listening to this program and have their own programs, they'll be able to kind of look past that and have this discussion, because we don't know what went on there.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You're exactly right, Tim. I appreciate you having me on. I would ask people just to read the book with an open mind. You know, when I started to write, I told myself that if I was gonna be a writer, I was gonna write the truth. I was gonna do as much research as I could, and I was gonna try to write the truth, regardless of how controversial. And that's what I think great writers do. That's what writers are here for, right?
Sure. Well, we're here to. I think that we're here to chronicle, you know, the human experience as best we can, and
try to find the truth. And there's a lot of people who are vested in things that aren't the truth. So, yeah, I mean, if it's controversial with me, that's okay, Tim, because that's my job as a writer, is to throw the ideas out there and let people decide on their own. You know, so
now you mentioned too that you have continued excursions out to the Hockomock, or have you kind of put that away since you finished the book?
Well, like I said, I mean, I finished this book in 2010, so it's kind of strange for me. I'm writing another book for young adults. I'm finishing up now. You know, I went in there for a long time, and I had some. I had kind of a strange time of it. Some experiences that weren't particularly good. So I have mixed feelings about it. You know. I don't go down there too much right now, but I think if anyone who's spent some time in there kind of understands what I'm saying. It's
Sure.
when
yeah.
you get into this kind of stuff, it kind of weighs on you.
Right. It definitely takes a toll, especially when you invest so much of yourself and so much of your time into it, and now you will be talking about it so much too that I can imagine. It only it's like if you got to make ice cream every day, you got to pour out ice cream for people. You probably don't want to eat ice cream all that much yourself anymore.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Although I
But,
don't. That's not a good analogy for me because I would never get tired of ice cream. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Peter. Again, his name is Peter Tower. The book is called Hockomock, Place Where the Spirits Dwell. It's available from Schiffer Books, wherever books are sold. You can also pick it up from Schiffer.com and linked up right on the front page of SpookySouthcoast.com. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Have a great night and a great Memorial Day weekend.
You too.
All right. That about does it for this week's show. We will be back next week following the Red Sox. We'll have hopefully some of the guests from Terracon coming on and joining us. We did have something planned where we're going to be talking about Dr. John Mack, but that is going to be postponed to a later date just because of scheduling conflicts with the director of the film, Denise David Williams. So we'll have her coming on in an upcoming edition of Spooky South Coast. And again, if you are new to the program, every episode we've ever done, it's all available via podcast, SpookySouthcoast.com, iTunes, wherever you find your podcast, you will find every episode that we have ever done. Even if you don't find it in your archive feed, because Hipcast, our podcast servers, messed up some of the stuff, you can get it right from SpookySouthcoast.com on the slideshow there. We have our archives linked up there, and you can download us on Stitcher and listen to us every Thursday on the Dark Matter Radio Network as well. So until next week, for Matt, Stephanie, I'm Tim. We want you all to stay spooktacular.
For local news, talk, and sports, the South Coast turns to AM 1420 WBS.